Welcome. This is the introduction to connecting to your data in Tableau. When you open the program, you'll see your connection options on the left side of the screen. You can connect to a file, to a server, or a saved data source. For this exercise, we're going to connect to Microsoft Excel. So when you download Tableau, it also downloads the My Tableau repository and houses it in your My Documents folder. There, Tableau also has other folders for map sources, shapes, data sources, your preferences file, and your logs. And you can see your version number here. And we're going to look into the English data sources. We'd like the sample Superstore data. So select that and hit open. The default data view for Excel and databases are the same. Tableau likes to treat Excel like a database, and that each sheet in the workbook comes up as its own table per se. If I'd like to view what's in that sheet, I can just select this View Data button. So Tableau also preloads here the first 10,000 rows or the entire data set, whichever one is smaller. I can go and look at all of the data that I'm going to pull in, and I can sort it, but I can't do anything else with the data at this point. So I want to get out of that. Now, if your data if you've extracted it from another source and you have those empty rows at the top and those rows at the bottom that tells you what the report name was and when it was rendered, you can select this Use Data Interpreter, and that'll actually really help clean up the data. We'll go through that a little bit later, but for right now, we're just going to double-click Orders. That does the same thing as dragging it onto this pane. And what we now see is our default, our summary level view. We see the first 1,000 orders by row ID. So, and I can see from this data selection what data types are being pulled in. So I'm pulling in integers for the row ID, strings, dates for the order, ship date, and I can even see that Tableau parses out the locations as such because of the field names. It automatically renders what if it has a matching field name in its geographic code. So if you wanted to see that, select the little map here, the little globe, and you see it's a string being pulled in as a country. Now, if I scroll to the right, what I'll see is I'll see my measures, and you'll note that every other field, the little data type, shows up as blue. That means that Tableau is trying to pull these in as discrete values, which means that you can categorize things, and these are the things that Tableau will measure. The green objects come in as continuous measures, which are the things that you use to measure. You are measuring, I guess. So what we want to be able to see is all the measures will probably show up in green, and all of your dimensions show in blue. So I want this data set to actually be all my orders with the salespeople and the applicable returns. So I'm going to add the other sheets to this. If those sheets reside on another Excel workbook or in another connection, you can simply add them here, and you can see all the connections that you can add to. You can even add a SQL Server connection or another Oracle connection or something like that. The things that are grayed out, you are not able to select because it doesn't play well with live data. But if you were to extract this, you might see some of these change, so you could join to a JSON file or something like that. But for right now, we're going to leave it at just this workbook. And I want to join people, so I'll drag that out. And I see when I do that, it actually goes ahead and drags, it's trying to make that connection, and it drags people and the region out to the view. And if I hover over this nice little Venn diagram, I can see what's joining. This is an inner join on orders and people. If I select it, I can actually change that if I needed to change that data connection. But I don't really need to right now. But what I do want to do is I find that this is a little misleading. I know it's the salesperson, but I think any other developer probably would think it was customers or salespeople. So I'm going to rename this to salesperson. So if I just click the name of that field, I can do that. But that just names the data connection and not the actual field. So I can do that here too by right-clicking and say rename and just typing in whatever I wanted to rename it to. So now I want orders. So if I double-click or drag that over, it's going to give me a left join. You can see my initial number of rows was 9,986, I believe. Let me see. So if I go up, I can do a little QA here. I have 9,994. But once I throw rows out here, I only have 3,000. So I know what this is doing. It's giving me all of the orders that have been returned. But what I want is all of the orders, whether or not they've been returned, and their applicable returns. There we go. So I just want the flag that says that they've been returned or not. So I'm going to click this little Venn diagram and change it to a left join because I want all orders with the returns. So if I select left, and I'm keeping that join the same, order ID to order ID. So now I can see I have more than 10,000 rows, and that kind of alerts me. But I know, let's double this number to see how many rows we actually have. So now we have 12,000 rows. So what I do know is that I have some returns that are on, I have some orders that have multiple returns. So I might see a specific order number twice in this. So that's totally acceptable. So what I want to do now, I can actually rename this to orders with returns. Now let's look at what these fields do below, what we're able to do, because you can actually do a lot of data manipulation right here. So if I click this, I can either rename this field. If I wanted to call this ID, I could. I could reset the name. That resets it to what it is in the back end. So if I needed to go back and nobody knew what ID meant, I can go back and change that. The same thing with that person, the salesperson I put over here. If I wanted to reset the name, it would go back to person. But I don't want to. So I hit back. You can also Control Z and Control Y in this, just like you would in Excel. So I can also do things like, if I didn't care for row ID, I'll find something applicable for this actually. Because when we joined those fields, when we joined these two other sheets, it's going to show the names of those duplicate columns with the names of that table afterwards, or the sheet afterwards. And I find it just redundant. So I see one here, order ID returns. I can right click and say hide. And region people, I can right click and say hide. So that's great. Let's see what else we can do. We can also alias things. So if I wanted to alias, say, segment, I don't want to change it in the data. Maybe I don't have access to the data, or maybe other people are using that data, but this dashboard, I want to call consumer, I want to call it customer. So I can select aliases and change that right here. And so now I see customer, home office, and corporate. If I wanted to sort that, I could do that right here too. I could sort by any field just the same way that I could in the previous view when we did our double check over here. So we have aliased, and so now I can create a calculated field straight here too. If I wanted to create something, you can do it here or you can do it on the sheet view later on. But say I know I want a calculated field that says, I want to call all the people, let's do this, Aaron. Let's see, I want to find somebody with multiple first names that looks the same. Alan, that'll be good. So let's create a calculated field. Let's just name it something silly. Alan's are number 1. If contains, and we'll go over calculated fields at a later time in depth, but this is just kind of a precursor. If contains, and it tells you how to keep going. You can even hit this little caret and it tells you what you could do in the same way that the Excel and other programs kind of walk you through with IntelliSense or something. So if contains customer name, and I want Alan, so the string and the substring, then I want to say VIP, end. So what this does is create a calculated field right next to customer name. And if I sort it, it'll pop up to the top. All my Allens are called VIPs. So too, what you can also do is create a group. And so what that would do is allow for some data manipulation right here. Say, instead of customer name, probably would be best to group things like your product names. So you want to group everything that has that is a certain value or something. If you wanted to group everything that was a staple pack, or if you knew of things that you wanted to group, and you can create a group. And so we can call this, who knows, we can call this West Supplies. And we can rename it up here. So now if I hit apply, it's interesting because the last one that we did, Allen's are number 1, when you hit OK, it went right beside it. But for grouping, it goes to the very end. So it should have grouped all those things that we grouped together. And it's called West Supplies number 1. Or West Supplies, I apologize. Doesn't want to show it here. But I won't get too far into the weeds there. So the next one to look at is that we can actually also split. Now, split and custom split work the same way, but they work just the same as the split into extra columns does in Excel, excuse me. Where if I wanted to split this product ID off into 3 different columns, I could. So maybe OFF, here it does look like it means office, BI means binder, and this is the product, the actual ID for that product. I can split those out by saying split, and it tries to read it automatically. So it knows that each thing in product ID had 3 groups, so it split it off into 3 different columns. So if you wanted to call this, you can rename these as say, this is category, this is subcategory. Oh, category, where did it go? Abbreviation. And you can do that with the other 2 as well. But so that's very helpful. Custom split works the same way, except it works in that way that if something has like a ragged number of things to split off, like if you wanted to split the product name out, here you would actually have maybe, if you split it out between spaces, then you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you did it up here, you'd have 5 or 6. So it can create like a ragged hierarchy that would be really useful if you were looking at location information. And so the last thing is still very important. So if I wanted to, I can actually, let's see. If we wanted to see what this really meant, I can go down and hit describe. And what this tells me is what this is, everything about it, and I can actually load the information for that. So I can see everything within that. It tells me if it's valid, all of the information specific to that field. And one last thing, the most awesome thing I personally think that you can do with a lot of this data, and it has a lot of value. Tableau likes things tall instead of wide per se. And say if you wanted to do some calculations where instead of having 4 measures fields, you want 1 measure field, you can actually pivot your data. And so what we can do is select, in this case, select your measures and select more than 1, and you can pivot. So if I create a pivot, what it does is in all of the headers, it now calls it my pivot field name, and in all my values, so the discount value, it shows in my pivot field values. But did you see how my number of records just changed from 12,000 to over 20? Let's see what my number is now. It should have went up 4-fold. Maybe. If I have 1 record per measure, then it would have quadrupled in size. So but I don't think it did because I don't think I show values for every measure. It went up to 49,000 records. And that might scare you, but it actually is faster to do that. And sometimes it's really needed to do it than have multiple values in one field, or to try to categorize things in one way. So now, let's go over this little piece. In our next view, we'll be talking about the differences, our next video, between live and extract feeds. But for right now, we can just leave this as an extract. If we leave this live, then it's great if you're going to connect live to a data source and you want the user to be able to maybe add data on the fly and you want to capture that. Say you're connected to log shipping or something. But most of the times, unless you're dealing with very large data sets or you need to have real-time data, I would connect to an extract. It means that your data is less volatile and you can refresh your extracts on a specific schedule when you publish the workbook to server, or you can refresh whenever you'd like to if you're just going to be viewing it within the desktop. This also helps with any volatility if you're connected to say, SQL Server, and somebody is still testing the data and they erase everything, everything would be gone if you connected live. But if you have an extract for that view, it's still there until you refresh. So I think it's very valuable to look into. Now, the other thing is, since we're extracting, we can edit kind of the way we're extracting this. I'll touch on this very lightly here, but we can add a filter. We can aggregate this for a visible dimension. And I like this. If you're connecting to something like ServiceNow or Salesforce or something where the data sets are always new and you get new rows of data that can overwrite things that were previous, so you never have history, you can create your own history with this incremental refresh using, say, an update date column or something. You can view the history. You can pull a sample set of data in. You can really direct and control your whole extract at this point. So I'm going to cancel that. And we can also set a data source filter on this dashboard. Say if you only want the things that were sold by Anna, you would add that field here. Salesperson equals Anna. Now we see that she has sold 18,000 things, or she has 18,000 records in this data set. So this is really great for row level security, or if you wanted to have a smaller data set and join multiple things. This is a great way to do it. So thank you very much for listening. I know this was a long one, but we'll go over, the next video will be over the comparison between live and extracted data sources. Thanks. Have a good day.